What is up, all you admirals out there? It is I, Juliet Whiskey, and this is the Armada Podcast. Thank you for joining us every Thursday, Friday. When do we send these out? We send these out on Fridays. God, I'm so tired. Anyways, tonight we have the three-time champion of the world. He hates when I say this, Kalorn. And for
I
our
don't hate
special
it. The people that listen to it, who are actually our world champions, hate it, and I am mad in their stead. So they don't get mad at me, and they get mad at you.
yeah, bring the hatred, bring the salt. It tastes so good. And tonight, for our special guest, we have Fraggle, correct me if I'm wrong, Fraggle Ken from Ion Radio. Thank you for joining us tonight. And like always, how is everybody doing tonight?
Well, thank you for that absolutely fabulous introduction. Yes, this is Ken from Ion Radio. How are you guys? I'm doing great.
That is
Now that we've heard from Jovan, who is on KXNO 92.9 late at night, for the K Love or whatever you want to call it.
Late night with whiskey. Remember, folks, keep it silky, keep it smooth. Anyways, what has everybody been up to for this past week or so since the last podcast episode? What has everybody been up to?
I need to go shopping and get you a little Cavassier to do a ladies' man episode, and we'll go from there.
I'm still working on the calendar. Kid, what have you been up to for the past week?
Well, I mean, Gencon's over, so my little mini vacation of a couple days, which, by the way, I think both John and I have to throw a huge shout out to our wives for letting us disappear for 4 days and do nothing but talk about and play Armada and other games. So big shout out to Mrs. Ken and Mrs. John. I don't know if they want their names out here, so I'm just going to call them Bubbles and Fifi. But we'll let your listeners decide which one's which, and I am going to totally get in trouble for that later, but that's okay.
Does she actually listen to the stuff you produce and stuff, or no?
So I know that both of our wives actually do watch, and well, they might listen predominantly to what we do. I know my wife just loves listening to me. I have the face for radio and the voice too, but this is why we do YouTube, because it works better that way. But I know they listen in, and John's son really just kind of drools, but he's less than a year old, so he's not really listening too hard. And of course, mine's a teenager, so I'm a giant nerd, and he doesn't want to know that I exist, because that's embarrassing for a teenager, right?
I am dreading that phase. I got a kid too. She's 9, so right now, Daddy is still the world and the coolest thing on the planet. And I'm like, yo. I got about 3 years left, 4 years left, and Daddy's about to, Dad, why are you? Oh my God, Dad. But we are definitely getting well off the reins, as all of you notice. One, we have cameras on this time. Hello.
Well, we do if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're not watching us on YouTube, know that Jovan may actually get this episode out sort of on time this week.
Maybe, possibly. There is a slim chance. And can we cuss? No, we can't cuss YouTube. Anyways, and two, unfortunately, Fox, right hand of God, Omega, couldn't join us tonight. So everybody send out your warm wishes on his mission into deep space. A moment of silence. Okay, that's enough of that. Anyways, now I am going to turn it over to Kalorn and Ken for the interview.
Well, I want to thank you, Ken, for being on the show with us tonight. I know we've gotten a chance to talk a couple times offline, but and we definitely listen to you guys on Command Stack, and the fact that you guys started making that kind of made us want to make a show. So we do appreciate that you guys started up doing that. I guess let's start with, how long have you been playing Armada, and what got you into it in the first place?
So I have been playing Armada since Wave 1 did not exist. I go back to, I remember I was in a Barnes & Noble. I was following Fantasy Flight. They had about 20,000 articles on, this is a command dial, and here's how you're going to move ships. And I'm thinking, this is the game I have wanted since I was 4 years old. And so walk into a Barnes & Noble, and there was this beautiful core set Go ahead.
Hold on. You know what I was doing at 4? At 4, I'm pretty sure I was still licking the walls. What do you mean at 4? You wanted this. I mean, understandable. There's smart 4-year-olds out there all around the world. You're probably one of them, but I definitely know for a fact at 4, I was like, ooh, color. What? I don't know what color it is, but it's pretty.
Well, see, I remember a time before Return of the Jedi and when Star Wars was this big thing in the early 80s and into the mid 80s. And I remember when droids and Ewoks came out on TV. And there was it was one of those ABC special things. And if I remember correctly, I think Mary Lou Retton was on it along with C-3PO and R2-D2, and they introduced 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. But I'm really going off on a weird tangent here, and now I'm dating myself. So, we'll just kind of leave that there. But to answer the question, yeah, I got that core box from Barnes & Noble. It was, I think, December of 2015 or something. It was before Christmas. I opened it up, and my first thought was, I need to get another core set because this is not enough ships. Then Wave 1 came out. I wound up playing a little bit locally, not too competitively, but in store championships and things like that. And I did okay, but there really wasn't a lot to work with in those days. The winning list was a victory and three gladiators, or you had the A-Wing swarm list with a couple assault frigates. So I played till about Wave 2, kind of stopped for about a year or so, and then Carillion Conflict was released, and that reinvigorated my entire journey back into the game of Armada. And then since sometime mid-2019, I wound up starting this YouTube channel called Ion Radio, and I've been playing a lot more Armada since then. And we are here now today in 2022. So the long answer to your question is 7 years.
Fair enough. Yeah, I definitely want to ask you a little more about Ion Radio here at the end, but after we talk a little bit about your playstyle and stuff. But it's funny because one of the things that you talking about, what got you into Star Wars in the first place. The first thing I remember about Star Wars was when the Thrawn books got released, because I was right in I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, right in there, something like that, and I was right in my like super reading phase, and so the Thrawn books and the X-Wing books were things that like I read obsessively as like a pre-teenager.
So those Thrawn books, 92, I think, is when they came out. And it was one every year. They released right around my birthday in June. So that was my birthday present. And man, that was like Star Wars was back in full force. And Star Wars Insider said there's going to be a new trilogy of movies and everyone's coming back for episodes 7, 8, and 9. And then we got, 1, 2, and 3. But even that was almost 5, 6 years later. And everyone wanted the Thrawn trilogy to come out. And I don't know, maybe we're seeing that with The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett and everything else. But that's speculation. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, no, I was very glad when they brought Thrawn back into the new canon, because he was always one of my favorite Star Wars characters. From the books that I read as a kid. So what would you say that your play style is like? I've noticed that the lists that you post tend to be kind of MSU rebel-y in general. Would you say that's your primary play style, or do you think it's a little more broader than that?
So I'll say that I'm more of a generalist. I can fly pretty much anything. We showcase that when we do our Madness series, where we have no idea what the fleets are until we open them up. But for me personally, if I'm going to try flying competitively, I do tend to do more MSU. I'm not necessarily going to stick, though, to Rebels. I will jump into Imperials. I'll jump into Rebels. I haven't really found a good combo yet. I'm working on one with the Separatists. Republic is something a little different, and I think that's because my play style tends to work where I almost need to do it to work with Republic, because I like to do a lot of navving, but I don't use navving for speed increases and decreases. I only use it for the clicks. And it's one of the things that John and I do radically different. He's using those dials to up a speed, slow down. I'm like, I want the click here. I want it there. I want to be maneuverable and get myself where it's in. I think it's one of those, I haven't been able to get that speed is life mentality out of my head.
So one of the things you just mentioned there, one, for the noobs in the back like me, Well, that's a vocabulary word for you. Make sure you write that down. Write that down. Write that down. Essentially, the click is you get that additional click on the maneuver tool to be able to turn sharper if you want to. But that is something important that I really don't use my nav tokens and my nav dials for, is that extra click. I'm always boosting speed or slowing down, but I don't ever really use it for click. So thank you, thank you.
See, I'm helping out, and I'm just sitting here talking. So
Hey, that's what we're here for. That's for sure. So uh, that leads us very neatly into the segue to, if you could give your advice to yourself or somebody new starting the game now, what would that advice be?
So I actually spent a little time thinking on this, and oddly enough, this was a question I was asked a lot at Gen Con by just random people that are wanted to get into the game or were just starting. And the local community group you have, I think, is by far the most important thing you can have for new players. You want to have individuals that can help you understand how to play the game, how to choose fleets, build up, learn the different aspects, card combinations, because honestly, when you get that experience from individuals in your community that are willing to help teach you, not just play a fleet that's going to decimate you and scores 6 million points, and you haven't scored a single hit on a squadron yet you're tabled completely. That's not the type of experience that you want to have as a new player. Because let's be honest, you're a new player, you should expect to not know all of the game. You've got to learn it. Armada is one of those games it rewards repetitive play. So as you play more, you understand more, and you learn a lot every time you lose and play a different opponent. Which, again, anyone that's watched our channel, I know quite a bit, and I'm really good at the game. I just don't show it. So, but it's you learn from playing, you learn from the community, you learn from whether it's podcasts like your guys or our Command Stack podcast. There's a lot of good YouTube videos on how to play. In fact, we've got a new series that we're talking about, we're in development for new players. We'll leave that to another day, but intentionally geared towards helping new people get into the game.
That's great. I mean, we get new people on the tabletop simulator Discord almost every day, it feels like, and we really have tried to have a spot for them to come in and to come, have a channel for them to just see a whole host of information that they can just start off with, and then we have new player helpers and stuff for them to try and get started. Because I mean, there's a number of people that don't have a local group to go to, and that, and without that, I mean, it's you certainly can, and we try to be as welcoming as possible in the Discord for Tabletop Simulator, but it's not the same. I mean, I love playing on TTS, but it's not the same as going down to your local store and putting your hand on a model and moving it across the table and interacting with somebody else.
No, there's a definitive difference there, and just spatial relations for me is a prime example. I mentioned I love the maneuverability of ships. I play much better on the table than I do in TTS, and I think the only thing that's better for me in TTS is the squadron play. That is actually kind of nice, but when it comes down to the actual ships, the maneuverability, the spatial relations, that's one of the things I can do well, and that comes from several years of X-Wing, which I would like to forget now.
Tell me about it. Jovan, what do you got?
It's one of those things that I definitely do agree with on playing. If you're a new player, get your hands on models. Like I don't have ADHD. I have not been diagnosed with ADHD, but I have ADHD. I would be playing on the computer. My brain's just like, you should totally go check Facebook. It's his turn. You have time to go do something else for like half a second. And I'm just like, no, we must focus. Compared to at the store, sitting across from the person, and when they're taking their time, I can just, hey, guy, hey, hi. I can be obnoxious. I enjoy it personally. Anyways, leaving it back to y'all.
So let's get into a little bit about your channel. And so what got you to start Ion Radio, and kind of what are your goals for the Ion Radio channel and the Command Stack podcast that you're part of?
So Ion Radio had a kind of an interesting beginning. So as I mentioned, I'd been playing Armada for a while and took kind of a break for a while, and then got back into it, and Carillion Conflict started up. And one of the local stores in our area here Well, in the Oak Lawn area, it's gone now, unfortunately. Greenfire Games. I started doing some streaming for X-Wing games, and I said, hey, why don't we try it for Armada? So on the internet somewhere, there is actually videos of me playing Armada 6 years ago. And John saw one of those. He was looking up for, hey, I want to see some Armada content. Master of the Fleet was still new. And then, Krabick had a couple videos, and that was pretty much it. And he saw, hey, there's a live stream going on. And then he started asking, hey, where are you guys? And we said, we're at this store in Oak Lawn. It's on corner of Central and 95th Street. And what he thought were Cicero and 95th Street. In either case, he said, that is literally 2 blocks away. And he stopped watching, walked in, and I got to meet John there. So we wound up playing a couple of games, and then we were the 2 primary people playing Armada at the time. And store owner said, why don't you stream your games? Okay. So we streamed a couple games. They were in charge of the setup, so we couldn't do it all the time, but occasionally we would. And then that store unfortunately closed down the day Wave 7 released. So John and I were like, well, no more Armada at that store. Sector Fleet came out, and I mentioned that this was the game that I wanted from the time I was 4 years old. And John and I got together, played this massive 1,200 point game. And yes, having like 6 Star Destroyers and tons of Rebel ships and squadrons everywhere was exactly what I've wanted since I was 4 years old.
It took 12 hours to play.
Oh, it totally did. But it was worth every one of those 12 hours. So we did that. And then the same owner opened another store, which is now also gone, didn't survive the pandemic, right at the time the Super Star Destroyer was released. And John and I started talking as we were watching that get together, and we're thinking, you know what? We missed the live streaming. What if we recorded a couple games and just tried it out? So we came up with a format, an idea. So the biggest thing that we knew right from the get-go that we needed to do was our damage reports we do between turns. So we spent a lot of time developing those, creating up what we felt were the elements, test ran a couple games, and we started filming a few. I think we had 3, 4, maybe 5 episodes filmed, and we said, let's throw one out on a Friday. And we were nervous, and it went out. We had a handful of people watch it. I think it took 3 weeks to hit up to 30 views, but there was a lot of positive encouragement. And we said, well, we were thinking maybe releasing one episode every month or maybe every 3 weeks. What happens if we release one the next Friday? So we did. And then we're like, wow, people are watching this. Maybe we should release one next Friday. And then we realized we're a weekly show and we just started and we got to get filming. So we started to backlog. We went through a whole bunch of different episodes. We started a Rebellion in the Rim campaign because we thought that would be interesting with that just coming out. And then the rest is kind of history. We've had a bunch of neat ideas. COVID hit. That actually kind of hurt us a little bit and accounts for the 2 weeks that we did not have a Friday broadcast. So we had enough filmed up. We couldn't get together. We were able to go, I think, 6 weeks into the pandemic. And then we're like, all right, we got to get back together. And then 2 weeks later, we did. And then with the exception of our 2 weeks, we don't broadcast an episode at the end of the year because no one's going to be watching anything Christmas and New Year's. We've had a show go every Friday.
So I got to say, I really do appreciate y'all's YouTube channel because I have watched the mess out of it. I have seen y'all's faces way too many times. But so just to give you a little bit back history, Matt dragged me into this. And a funny story, Omega, when he dragged me into this, he actually dragged me into it twice. I saw him playing it at Dragon's Lair, the one that we used to go to. And he's like, hey, you want to check out this game? And I'm like looking at it, I'm like, man, this looks really cool. Like space naval combat. All right, I get it. That's neato. And I ran off to go play D&D. And then our wives actually met up later on Facebook and they started hanging out. I go to his house to hang out for a little bit. So he's like, hey, have you ever played this game called Armada? And I'm just like, wait, you're that guy. So after that, he's like, yeah, I like it. It's fun. It's cool. But I need to spin myself up real fast because I can't make it out to the store every Friday. I got other responsibilities, unfortunately. So I ended up landing on y'all's channel and just like video after video after video of just y'all playing. I'm like, okay, I think I get some of the basics.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. We've got a lot of content. Actually, John and I were just looking at that. We have over 250 individual components on our channel. We're somewhere right around. I think we just filmed our 100th 400 point battle. So we've got something special coming out for that. But between that, we're on our third campaign, and then we've got BattleTech and other things in there as well. It's we got a lot. So, but thank you very much. Our goal is really to try and bring in new players to help give them a point of reference to start with the game, to see what we have. We've got a learn to play episode. We're actually in development with that new beginner series, which we may or may not talk about on our channel in the next week or two. We just started up our high ground series, which is now our top level competitive series. So we take 2 tournament fleets and we put them up together. My guess is we're going to see some Gencon fleets in the not too distant future. But a lot of that is designed towards a more competitive mind, more competitive player. And then the rest of our episodes, our bread and butter, is really there for entertainment. Here's a jank fleet. Here's an interesting concept. Or sometimes we have a funny thing. Last season that we released an episode, it was Tarkin versus Tarkin, because why not? It's a lot of thought goes into it. I think we generally film, and this is a comment that comes up every once in a while. We made the suggestion, you said you were going to do it, but it hasn't happened yet. And we're both thinking, well, yeah, that's because it's going to happen about 12 episodes from now, because we literally film, I think we have almost all of 2022 filmed. And we're now looking at 2023 and know where we are going to go. We film probably a good 12 episodes in advance, just because for us, we want to make sure we have the time to edit and we have the ability to have that crisp presentation, because that's what people come back for. And then the consistency of our content. If we release every Friday, people are going to watch. And right now we're releasing with Rebellion of the Rim 2 Armada episodes every week. And then when we do Command Stack, there's a third bonus one, and that's our podcast. And credit should go out to Ryan Becker and Garrett Vance. It was kind of their concept that they started talking to John and myself about. We got together, came up with our format, and that's how Command Stack came about. It was great meeting those guys at Gen Con. It was the first time we got to really talk to them and hang out with them. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that one of the really important things that you said there is talking about consistent content. And that was one of the things I learned making my previous podcast, is that one, audio production is, for a podcast anywhere, is and audio fidelity is the absolute paramount. And if you don't have good audio fidelity, people don't want to listen to your podcast. They get annoyed. Even if they like the content, they get annoyed at the act of listening to it. So that was, getting good microphones and having a good recording studio and having good editing. All those things are very paramount, but also having consistent content, particularly with podcasts, is they want to say, hey, it's this day of the week, I can count on you being there to listen to. And if you can provide that, then you get a repeat and they don't ever miss an episode. What do you got, Juliet Whiskey?
One, shout out your previous podcast. You got to give the name to the people. No, say it, tell them.
Oh yeah. I understand. It was called the Worships Podcast. It was about World Warships. I made like 150 episodes of that. Kind of had a falling out with the people that ran that game called Wargaming. Whole different story. Don't really want to go down that particular path, but it taught me so much about like what it is to make a podcast and what the production values of that are. And so like it's interesting that hearing you say, Ken, that you guys have, you guys want to have a backlog of episodes. That's really not something you can do with a podcast and have it stay topical. Because if you're 12 weeks out of a podcast, they don't really want to listen to what you're going to say 12 weeks from now, if that makes sense.
No, it 100% does. And I think that's actually one of the things that really appealed to John and myself when we started talking with Garrett and Ryan about creating Command Stack. We wanted to be able to sit down and say, hey, we want something that's topical and current, because we can't really do that on the video productions. We will. Case in point, Rapid Reinforcements came out. John and I got together 2 days later, and actually that dropped. I was on an airplane to San Francisco when it came out. So it took us a couple days, but then we literally got together, filmed 2 episodes, and had one out the next day, and were able to maintain our quality for our video standard. But we have it down to a science now. So for us, our presentation, we know how to do it well. We're efficient with it.
Yeah.
Mad props, because I used to stream, so I learned my lessons. I got my black eyes for them real fast. Of one, even in video content, that audio quality, man, that can make or break a video in a heartbeat. And two, consistency, which I am not consistent, and that's why I'm a hair away from getting fired. I see him, look at those eyes. He is like, dude, if you don't get a video out, I will come to your house. Anyway, sorry, continue.
We've spent a good 25 minutes here chit chatting with Ken. It's been great. But we brought you on to talk about Gen Con and your experience there. Specifically, we want to talk about day one. Next week, your buddy John's going to come on and talk about day two, and kind of how the top end of that bracket went. But let's get into talking about Gen Con a little bit. I ran through and did some statistics here today for us to talk about. But I first want to talk about just kind of like, did Gen Con feel like a major tournament? And I don't know if you've been to major tournaments before this Gen Con, or like I got some conflicting reports from people that I know that went, that said that there were some really good aspects to it, but there were some aspects that maybe weren't as good.
So Gen Con definitely felt smaller than it has in prior years. Now, that's probably partially the pandemic and everything else. So you're not going to get 75, 80,000 people in Indianapolis. But I'd say it was probably in the 50 to 55,000 range. It was still pretty packed and bigger than it was when it first started at Indy. I think the fact there was only 31 or 32, it was 31 people that wound up actually being in the tournament, with 33 signed up. That to me seemed a little bit low. And again, probably because of the pandemic. I think if we were 2-3 years ago, we would have had 40 individuals signed up and actively playing at the tournament. So I think that was one thing that I thought was a little smaller. The vendor hall was different groups of smaller vendors, and then there were vendors that just weren't there. The sign was there, and that was it. So from the perspective of the tournament and Gen Con, the pandemic definitely had an impact. I think there was not as many individuals that came, whether it was a company doing a booth or individuals showcasing their product. But it was definitely a good presence of Armada players that were hanging around and not in the tournament, though, also. So it is possible we just had a bunch of individuals with Worlds invites sitting around seeing who is going to be joining with us and what do we have to think about come Worlds in March. That's my guess anyways. The one thing I can say I did notice was lacking, and this is just because I'm going to notice this, the War Gamers did not seem to be there. Usually there's like 6 World War II games going on. There's a giant table all week and long for Federation and Empire, and I saw none of that. So I think the grognard in me was a little disappointed, because I didn't have those chit pushing games to whet my appetite.
So I guess one of the things is, like, AMG is just getting into this concept of organized play, and this was the first one that this first tournament that AMG themselves has run, and hasn't like farmed it out to like Karnak or somebody else of that caliber. Did that have an effect on the tournament as a whole?
It did. There was very clearly a presence of Asmodee Atomic Mass Games there. The tournament was very well run. I'm going to give a huge shout out right now to Brad, who's the tournament organizer. He did an outstanding job. Everyone that I talked to said that he was a really decent judge. He was able to keep the game going, and everyone had a good time. At least that was my impression. I had a great time.
That's pretty impressive, because I was told that he'd only been started playing the game in the last few weeks.
He'd played Armada before. He's actually part of the Chicago group from our local store, Games Plus, out in Mount Prospect. There's my one shout out for the podcast. He's been playing for a while. I know that because I've been playing against him here and there. He's predominantly a Legion player, but I will say he sat down and did a lot of homework, was asking everyone a lot of questions to make sure he understood rule interactions. And I know he probably had Karnak on speed dial also, just in case something came up. But again, when you start looking...
Don't we all?
Really. When you look though at the quality of individual playing at the tournament, and you might touch on this in a little bit, but of the 31 players, with maybe two or three exceptions, everyone was clearly a veteran player. So if you're going to call a judge in, you are calling on a really specific interaction, or it's going to be a line of sight thing or something along those kind of lines. And for the most part, I think it wound up working out fairly well. I'm unaware of any issues that there were judging wise. So, but to be fair, I was only in 3 games, not 6. But I had a lot of fun on day 2 also, and man, I was stress free. That was great. Watching John and Ryan and Garrett sweating like, oh my god, I got to win, do well. I need my Worlds ticket. I'm glad I wasn't doing that actually. So for me, it wound up being the best of both worlds. I got to cruise around the uh, exhibition hall and play a couple games and meet a lot of really good people that were fans of the game and fans of the show.
So while you were kind of looking across tables of people playing Armada, what did the meta look like to you of the people that came and what they brought? I mean, I have some impressions based on going through the lists, but just like when you were at the tables and watching, 30 or 31 people play Armada, what did it look like in terms of a meta from your was there anything was there anything that was really I know we had a lot of Starhawk things, and we'll probably talk about that more with John next week. But was there anything else that really stood out to you, or did it really feel like a kind of a muddled meta that we've talked about previously?
So when I was at, I think it was with the last Prime in Gurnee, right before the pandemic hit, the big ship there was onagers, a couple superstar destroyers, and a little bit of MSU fleets, and predominantly rebels. Looking at Gen Con, there were only, I think, 3 Starhawks, maybe 4. I forget exactly. I think it was 3 Starhawks, only 4 onagers. And of those 4 onagers, they were all in a different fleet. None, there was no 2 dual onager fleets at all. A lot of MSU or kind of MSU. And the variations in admirals and fleet concepts were pretty diverse. So, did it feel like a major tournament? Yes. It was unique though, because I think everyone's trying to figure out what is going to be the new meta. The Starhawks clearly dominated, so there's a reason that we're going to be talking about those because they've dominated on day 1. All of them made it into day 2. So there was a lot of the Chicagoland meta there. I want to say about 8 people, and the one thing that comes out of that is going to be Ozzel. I noticed that. So a lot of ships try and maneuver for position, etc. But I think the only reason I noticed that was because I play with a lot of these folks when I go to the local stores. So I saw a lot of friendly faces. And then I know Louisville had a little contingent of like 5 or 6 players. So right there, those 2 metas was more than half of who wound up showing up. So those 2 regional areas and how they play were very prevalent. There's a couple Texas players too, I believe, that were there and then made their showing. And that clearly you can tell that, based on what I've heard from you guys, Lone Star Open, etc., those fleets were there.
So I do got a quick question for you while we got an opportunity. The Chicago meta, what does that look like right now?
You've got a good mix. It looks akin to what you're going to generally see in a your typical tournament, where you have a percentage that's going to be more or less equivalent on the Imperial and Rebel side, and then a small sliver on the CIS and GAR side. So it's, interestingly enough, it's very representative of what you generally see at major tournaments. There is one thing I'll notice though, and I see this amongst other groups as well. If you have your Imperial players, you have your Rebel players, you have your I'm trying the new Republic Separatist players, but they stick in that faction and that's it. Maybe they edge out a little bit trying something new. That's something that happens. I'm one of those weirdos that goes and will do a little bit of everything because it's fun to try something different.
So, Ken, I noticed that things didn't go great for you, according to to the ladder here, and so you're a top 30 player out of 31. So we'll call it that way. It sounded to me like you spent a lot of time thinking about your fleet, listening to you guys talk on Command Stack, and the things that you said. talking with John and whatnot. So what went right? What went wrong? What did you what of the things that you were expecting going into this tournament with your fleet? You know, how did reality compare to what you were expecting?
So I'm going to say the fact that I did not place dead last and John did not table me were two giant victories for me, and that to me is all I needed for day one. What went wrong? I put too many eggs in a basket, right? My fleet was designed around I could lose one component, whether it's my flagship, one of my MC-30s, my set of Gazantes, or the squadron wing. But it really was a little too generalized. And I remember thinking the first day we got to Indianapolis, so I think it was Thursday, and I'm looking around saying, I wonder if I can pick up another MC-30. Because if I could, I would have completely changed my fleet last second and dumped my squadrons. But alas, couldn't find an MC-30, so there was no changes to my fleet. I brought, I think, 6 fleets with me, and I only had 2 MC-30s. So such is life, and I just played with what I had. I was kind of, every matchup I got, it was either I played John in the Starhawk, because, this is what you want to do when you go to a major tournament, is face someone that knows your fleet so incredibly well, and you know theirs really well, that the outcome's already predetermined. I mean, it was, the only regret we had there was that we didn't bring a camera to just record it, because that, talk about saving ourselves a week for recording. Next one wound up being a fleet where I went up against an interdictor, and I just couldn't do enough damage on it. Then the final ordeal was a separatist fleet, I believe, which again, I'm doing damage on it, but just not enough. And the two things that kind of wound up losing out, all the rerolls I had with Hera, with my bombers, never mattered. And Torin didn't help me out there either. So when I'm rolling blue dice, Torin didn't work. When I'm rolling red dice, Hera didn't work. And then on day 2, my rerolls were magic, like they are on the channel, where I'm rolling doubles into doubles, blanks into doubles, and it's just, I'm unstoppable in that regard. But blue dice were almost always accuracies.
That's wild. And sometimes like the fates just say you're not winning today. It's like there's it's just not going to happen. And I've certainly experienced games like that. I think we all have at a certain point or another. Let's talk a little bit about what you touched on earlier. We had a faction split. Of the 31 players, we had 14 Imperial, we had 11 Rebel, 4 GAR, and 2 CIS. That about corresponds roughly to what we're seeing here in Texas as well. You've got the it may have been a little more Imperial heavy than we have seen recently here, but it pretty much tracks that you have mostly the old factions and then a couple of the new factions. What are you seeing as the big barriers to entry to people playing the newer factions in a tournament like this? We've often talked about that it has to do with just the maturity of those factions, but also more we feel like it's more to do with people are more comfortable with what they've been playing for years.
I think there's 3 answers to that question. The first one you already touched on. It's a level of comfort. I've been playing Imperials and Rebels for 7 years. I know how they work. With the Republic and Separatist factions, they're still new. And out of the pandemic, you've only had a handful of months of actual playtime on the table with them. Sure, you've got the TTS and vassal tournaments going on, but when you get the ships in your hand and you're at a table, it's completely different. I think the second item here is the factions are new enough where you have to figure them out. The Separatists are a lot easier to figure out than the Republic, which is kind of odd that you've got 4 GAR lists and 2 CIS ones at Gen Con. But with GAR, you're looking at the token shenanigans. You have to have everything go off just right. And when you forget, I got to activate Admiral Tarkin at the beginning of the turn, your entire game plan goes out the window. So there's definitely a component there. And I think the one that's probably most critically important, the Clone Wars factions are not finished. They need one wave. I think each fleet needs one more ship, probably a small or medium base ship that can kind of just fill a support role of some sort, or another, lighter, heavy cruiser type of a build. And all of them we need a squadron pack that has strategic thrown in there, because that kills half the objectives.
You've hit like every major thing I've been saying. You've hit every major thing I've been saying. Because freaking one, Gar is way too complex. I love me some Gar. I'm a Gar boy. I will always be a Gar boy because I am garbage. Anyways, but Gar, it just has too much shenanigans going on at any given time. You forget something, and oh yeah, there goes my freaking flagship for the 5th time this week. Great. And then it also just feels like there's an empty spot, a hole. There is a ship that belongs in this spot, and I don't have it, and it gets me killed every time. So thank you for confirming my biases.
Well, I think rapid reinforcements helped. I think if we were to see a rapid reinforcements too, boy, I would love one of those. You might finish the ship thing, but we still need that squadron pack. And there's got to be 1 pack, 4 fighters, 2 for the Republic, 2 for Separatists, and I think we'd be set. Whether maybe it's a Architans and I don't know, maybe a CR90 or something for the Separatists, but whatever that other ship winds up being, hey, maybe we can bring back the assault frigate. But I think we just need to get that little bit there. And I think the other thing you mentioned, the complication of playing Gar. Let's say you have that down and you understand exactly how your list works. Can you now do that 3 rounds or 4 rounds in a tournament and keep it all together? And that's one thing to keep in mind. Gencon was initially going to be a 4-round event for day 1. So a lot of folks were planning on, 4 rounds, but we just didn't have the player count. My guess is, I think if we would have gotten to 32, we would have had 4 rounds, but at 31, you get 3. I could be wrong on that. I'm the wrong person to ask, but that threw us all off.
In general, we've been kind of going to that 4 rounds when we get over about 20, 24 players. And it really does make a big difference in kind of the way that the tournament structure works. I find that if you have one bad game in a 3-round tournament, you're pretty much toast. But if you have one bad game, you can eat one bad game in a 4-round tournament and have a way to make up for it. And so I find that the 4-round tournaments tell you a lot more about like what is and then in a 3-round tournament, you're much more at the mercy of your matchups. Whereas in a 4-round tournament, you get you tends to even out a little bit. So I'm always a proponent for 4-round tournaments for anything that's kind of on the more serious end, but it wasn't our tournament to run. So they kind of went the way they did. With that said, I was very intrigued by the Admiral spread that showed up here, and you guys talked a little bit about this on your podcast, but we've been seeing admirals getting kind of clustered together. But we didn't see any Riken, which I was expecting. We did, we saw a fair bit of Ozzel. We saw a fair bit of Sloan. We saw 3 Tarkin for the Garkin list, which I got in trouble with on Facebook today when I said that there were 3 Tarkins, and they're all like, "Oh, were they Gar or the Imperial?" I'm like, "What do you think they were? Come on, who the heck plays Imperial Tarkin?" But then there was a Maydeen. There was you got a couple Kraken. What was your thought when you looked at this and were you like, is this some people trying new stuff out? Is this people like teching against onagers? What was your first thought when you saw this lineup of admirals?
I think the biggest fear everyone had was facing a dual onager list, and they weren't there at all. And I was geared towards taking out an onager. My MC30s are really good at doing that. I've done it a couple times. I did it in ITC. I've done it online. I've done it in the stores, and I did not face a single onager. So, once again, my list, just what I build it for, just didn't get the opportunity to use it. I think that was one thing. I don't know if everyone was prepared for what the Starhawk would really do and how they were built. And I think that kind of took a few players by surprise. But Yeah,
They
Reich
should
and
have
I.
been listening to us and talk about what I did at TXO. I mean,
Well,
the
well,
funny thing is that I get a whole bunch of people that send me messages like, "What have you unleashed on the meta?" And John's probably getting them too. But I just send him that meme from what is it, Moana or whatever, where with the guy that says, "What can I say except you're welcome?"
I think of, regardless of who really brought it out, right, or if anyone really did, this is inevitably going to happen. And we talked about this on Command Stack. We're in this rock paper scissors kind of a thing where we figured out the Onager. The Starhawk is the next thing to go, and again, because of COVID and it's stopping a lot of tournament play right as that wave was released, we don't know what we're doing with it yet. And now we are. So we're going to play that. So you're guaranteed the next major tournament, there's going to be 4 people that bring one of those Hawk 134 lists. And there's going to be people that are going to bring things specifically to destroy it. And this is part of the fun of Armada. And actually, one of the things that's kind of neat about it is we always have this opportunity to try new things. And any fleet theoretically is viable. And when I bring out the ultimate Grand Moff Tarkin list that's unbeatable, I will be responsible for that one.
There you go. There you go. And like I said, it's kind of a joke. I mean, just in a way, because like I don't, and I heard John talk about this. I don't feel bad about playing the list that I played, and he doesn't feel bad about playing the list that he played. These are things that are legal in the meta, and they should be legal in the meta. There are ways like and some people are like, "What have you done? What have you done? It's this thing," and I'm like, do you really think that I would have played something like this without having thought about it beforehand, how to counter it? And I guarantee that John already has thoughts on how to counter what he's already done. Like the people that play this kind of stuff, they're already a jump or two ahead. And so like the answers are out there. The old X-Files tagline is what the truth is out there. The truth is out there, guys, in Armada to counter just about anything. You just have to go find it and play it.
What I honestly find really funny about how everyone is taking this, oh no, Starhawks are evil, they're overpowered and everything. It reminds me exactly of what we said about the Onagers, or what was being said about the Onagers not that long ago. But I'm going to directly equate it to every single team in Formula One that complains Mercedes is using a wing that should not be used and they're winning all these races, so we need to disqualify it because what they're doing is wrong. No, they're following the rules and you just don't like it. And that's, I think, what's going on.
Well, just to swing back around to F1, Mercedes is spending way more than everybody else, and that's why they keep winning. But that's neither here nor there. Sorry, just had to interrupt there.
There's no salary cap in Formula One. I mean, is there a salary cap in Armada here? I guess that's the point. The point system, right? The point system is our salary cap. Okay. Uh, I want to talk a little bit about activations and deployments, because I was very entertained by it when I went through and made some of these when I made this charts and stuff here, because when you look at particularly at the activations, it's very much mostly 3 and 4 activations is the predominant, and then you had basically outliers for anything else. In particular, you had somebody that played a Sloan list that was just 2 ships and trying to bring back the old 2 ship list from without the benefit of price, and honestly, he did pretty decent with it. It was Nick G, and it looks like he just barely missed making the cut. Is that correct? So that was interesting. And then you had a couple of like 5, 6, 7 activation lists. This is one of the things that has been really interesting to me with 1.5, is that we've really cut down on these like large activation suites, and we're down into this like 3 or 4 activations is the bulk of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. 1.5 made the biggest change there was the pass token, and you made bail and price illegal to use and threw out strategic advisor. So your first last with your large fleets went away. The best way to combat that is try and kill one of those ships with 5 or 6 or 7 different small ones. Death by 1,000 cuts. So I think those rule changes are exactly why we're generally seeing 3 or 4, occasionally 5 ships. in a fleet. And when you look at let's use my channel as an example, the vast majority of the fleets we fly since 1.5 are 3, 4, or 5 activations with maybe a pass token here or there. So where the real difference is with deployments and the number of squadrons you bring.
Yeah, and that's the next point of the list is you look at the number of deployments people bring. Basically, if you took less than 7, you were in trouble. You had a lot of people that were right at that 7 number, and then a couple at 8, and a couple and one at 9. But that 9 deployment list is really funny, and we might talk about that in a second. But this concept of more deployments through squads, I feel like it was present in Armada before 1.5, but man, in the competitive meta, it's like if you're not bringing 7 deployments, you are not going to be able to do what you need to do.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. But again, look at Armada's there's 2 games that are played. There's a competitive game where we are looking at any resource you bring has to bring value to your fleet and has to be able to trade up to destroy something bigger. And I think when you look at the larger component of Armada, and this will be where you see your new players come in or the ones that don't play a lot, they want to play the game. They're kitchen table gamers. So they're not thinking along those lines. So sometimes you're going to see some weird outliers, and that's probably why. And then other times it's you've got someone that just, I have this great idea. We're going to try it competitively, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't.
I do want to touch for a minute on the 9 deployment guy, because he had 10 TIE bombers. He had 10 TIE bombers and then 2 named TIE fighters in his, and I was like, oh boy, did you see that fleet? Did you see how that went down? Because that one fascinated me when I saw it in the list.
Was that Adrian's fleet?
Yes, it was Adrian's fleet. He had 3 ships and 9 deployments with 122 points of squads.
Adrian's great. He is probably one of the nicest guys I've ever known. So Adrian's part of the Chicago meta. This is his
Clearly, he was flying Ozzel.
Yeah, well, see, it's Ozzel, and it's his Sith fleet. He's got it painted up really nice, red stripes on black ships. He did a really good job in a Super Star Destroyer also. But a lot of fun, and this is just a list he enjoys flying, and he does it very well. And I had, I don't know if it was, I think I had an Ozzel list, or maybe it was a Kraken list. I forget. It was another MSU list I brought to a tournament, and I came so close to beating him with it. But he did some changes to it, and then he's moving forward. And I know I met him for lunch one of the days during Gencon. He's already got his next concept in mind, but he's got some really interesting, neat ideas for how to fly that fleet. And I don't think anyone can quite fly it the way he does.
It was wild, man. I've never seen 10 TIE bombers in one list before, and it was like, whoa, that's out there. So let's talk about squads for a little bit, because we've been talking about that a little bit here as well. There were 5 squadless lists, which was kind of more than I was expecting, and I broke up them into buckets of no squads, 1 to 50 squads, 51 to 100, 101 to 129, and more than 129. And basically all of those buckets were essentially even. You were, when you look at those buckets, it was, between 5 and 8 fleets in each one of those buckets, which I find to be really kind of interesting. I was expecting there was a lot of squads there. I was expecting there to be a lot of squads there, but there's also people that are kind of eschewing that whole squad game. And I find that to be kind of interesting, because in Texas, you find that if you don't have squads, unless you're playing something like the SSD, you're not going to do well.
I question how much of this is partially people's concepts of activation padding, so that you have, or not activation, deployment padding, so that you can put something down and get a slightly better positioning on one of your key ships. I know that you've got a lot of folks, if you're bringing fighters, you're bringing 134 points or as close to it as you can, because you want your full-blown squadron ball. There are international metas where it's kind of closer to that 80-point range. I myself was at 94. So there's different concepts of how fighters get used and how they're running around in terms of how are they an effective component part of your fleet? Is it just Shara and Tico, and you're using it to hold down a set of squadron here, hold down a set of squadrons here? Are you running a Reimer ball, which we don't see too much of anymore? Maybe I'll bring that back with the Tarkin list. And, you got Biggs balls that are out there. And then you have variations. John had a ton of YT 2400s and some VCXs. So again, I think there's a number of reasons why we see so many variations on the squadron level. And I think it's 3 or 4 different components, like I've already mentioned, and everyone's still trying to figure that out as it pertains to the changes in 1.5. That's my guess. I have no idea if I'm right. I'm probably totally wrong. But if I'm going to throw a guess at it, that'd be it.
Fair enough. And I guess the last thing is talking about bids a little bit. I find bids to be a little fascinating to talk about because every bid graph that I've ever seen or ever made, it always reminds me of the Nike swoosh. You've got a little peak of people that are like bidding like crazy, and then you've got like this valley, and then everybody at 400 points. And so I find it's funny because it's like, again, like it reminds me of the Nike symbol. And that is again what we saw here is that we're starting to I do feel like the bid wars have really started to heat up recently. And John talked about, he took even more bid than he did when he played essentially the same list in the Chicago Open.
Yes, John pilot tested I don't even want to say pilot tested because it's like his 3rd or 4th variation on that fleet. But he brought the key components that he wanted to try to the Chicago Open and then made, I think, a handful of changes to it that were minor. But he was looking at it saying, I need a bigger bid here. And you see that. We had that with 2 ships and with Radis drops and back in the day where you wanted to bid for first. Maybe you wanted to bid for second, depending on how your fleet was built. And then it kind of all went away because I don't care if I go first or second. I'm going to blow you up with this fleet archetype. Then 1.5 came out and everything changed. And COVID hit and we couldn't do anything about it, right? So actually COVID hit first, then we got 1.5, if I recall correctly. So I think this goes back to we have not really had enough of these major things yet. And by major, I'm saying even with all the Texas series you guys have done, we don't have a full season of tournament play for all this to play out.
So I just quick question for you because I just went and double checked the chart, and I noticed 387. Huh? Who? What? You brought that to? How did they explain? Please now.
That's Radis. So that is Radis, and Ryan Becker is one of those fleets that have 387. And Ryan, if you have Radis, you need to go first. Because if you don't, the whole thing just kind of falls apart. And so you bid deeply, but the other thing is Radis is a one-trick pony, and Ryan said it on your podcast. I've said it a million times because I played around with Radis last year quite a bit, including in the ITC last year. Radis is a one-trick pony. He's going to drop on you, he's going to kill something, and then he's going to run away. And you don't need all of the points you don't need 400 points worth of ships to do that, because you're focusing on a very small part of the game, and then you're going to ignore everything else. And that's why that you can get away with those really, really big bids in a list like Radis. So, and it's kind of it's similar to, from what I've been told, is the people that were bidding a lot in the 2-ship era to outbid each other to go first, because in the 2-ship era you wanted to go first and alpha your opponent with your squads.
I guess I just have to adjust my thinking on this, because Gar 387, no, just no. You need every point that you have to do something. In 387, you can't bring enough to do anything. But what's your take on it, Ken?
Well, I mean, with Gar, I'm going to agree with you. You want to tally that up to 400 points, but you bring Anakin, Ahsoka, and blow a bunch of squadrons up, and then you're fine, right? I think let's take Ryan's fleet as an example. I mean, Radis, he bid enough. The one time he faced a Starhawk, he was able to blow it up. And I think he was the only player at Gencon to take down a Starhawk. There were a couple players that came very, very close. John almost lost one of his. I think he had 6 health left on one of his Starhawks at the end of the game. It's hard to do, but you get your right list and you can take it out. And it wound up benefiting him, as I think Ryan placed 4th in the at Gen Con?
I think so. I don't have the day 2 stats in front of me. I just have the day 1 ones. But yeah, no, I mean it's one of those things. Like it's certainly I think Radis is a great answer to Starhawks. I really do, as long as you're willing to make that commitment. So we're gonna move on and close out the show here with Whiskey's favorite segment of the day.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is time for Hot Take 30. Usually, see, I don't have a full staff to annoy today, so I'm gonna be gentle and nice. Ooh, we have cameras. Y'all should totally rock, paper, scissors. Don't rock, paper, scissors. There's time lag. It doesn't work too well. I've tried it before. Anyways, so for Hot Take 30, we're going to start off with Ken. Rogue Hera is better than X-Wing Hera. Why are we trying to fight the X-Wing player so much? We have to stop picking on them.
No. We're talking about the new Hera in her X-Wing in Armada, not the X-Wing players.
Oh, okay. Well, we can pick on them anyways. We see you, X-Wing fighters. We see you.
I'm going to hide my X-Wing stuff and just leave it, over there where you can't see it.
I sold mine.
I still have mine. I love my X-Wing. I enjoy playing it, but it's just not competitively, just for fun. Heroes Artillery Cluster, or whatever that is called. All right, so Hera and the Ghost versus Hera and the X-Wing. Each one serves a slightly different purpose. And I think I took Hera in her X-Wing to Gen Con. Probably not going to do that again. I'm going to stick with Ghost Hera. And my reasoning for that, when you look at damage output, anti fighter to start, Ghost Hera has 2 blues, 2 blacks, so you're going to do about 2.5 points of damage against opposing squadrons. And then Hera in the X-Wing, you replace one of the black dice for a red die, so your statistical change goes down to about 2.25 points of damage. She doesn't benefit from her adept, but the other escorts do, which means you're bringing more X-Wings, which means you kind of have to almost bring either a Biggs Ball, or you're bringing, Luke and Wedge and Biggs all together, and you're spending your points on ace squadrons. You get 2 braces instead of 1. So your survivability is probably going to be about the same. Plus you get the dodge with Hera and the X-Wing. So you might be able to keep Hera alive a little bit longer to allow her to give an ability to a handful of squadrons, potential rerolls. So maybe you're increasing their damage output by 1/4 to 1/2 a point, depending on what you're rolling. Hera in the Ghost. So Rogue Hera, you don't have to use a squadron command to help her out. She's going to give 2 more squadrons Rogue. So now you have 3 Rogue squadrons capable of doing something. Your damage output is better. She can bomb better. She can attack fighters better. And then you've got 2 other squadrons that, all right, now you're a Rogue. So here's 2 Rogue A-Wings you don't need to command. Lock this set of squadrons down, lock that set of squadrons down. So my take after playing Hera in her X-Wing a couple times, there is definitively a use for Hera. I'm not going to say that there's not, but it's going to be more limited in scope, in my opinion, based on what I've played, than you're going to see with Hera in the Ghost.
I want to jump in here a little bit because I have gotten a chance to put X-Wing Hera on the table, and I think that her survivability is quite a bit higher than the Ghost survivability, because if you're taking a whole bunch of X-Wings, and X-Wings have escort, and she in her X-Wing does not have escort, so she is literally going to be the last thing to die in an X-Wing ball. Is generally what I found, which is good because you want her there for her ability. I personally find her reroll is quite good, especially in conjunction with Torin when you're talking about the anti-fighter stuff. But it's a commitment. Like if you're going to take X-Wing Hera, you're probably taking 134 points of Biggs, X-Wings, and Jan and Hera, and you can't just take Hera and a couple of X-Wings. It's not worth the points investment. So I think that's the big thing is like Ghost Hera, take her and take 2 other squadrons and you're fine. X-Wing Hera, it's an investment, a really, really big points investment.
No, I 100% agree. And that's why I said for a certain fleet archetype, Heron, that X-Wing is perfect because, again, you have to really go up. 94 points of squadrons and X-Wings is not enough. You do have to get, I think, like you said, to that 134. And you really have to commit to being able to leverage her as bomber. You get Torrin in there to help out. Although I did have one game on day 2 that I was playing where that neither one of them helped at all, because you need hits to get squadrons, and when you're rolling crits and accuracies, that doesn't do any good.
Yeah, and like I said, dice are going to be dice at a certain point, but I do find her ability to be quite useful. So, you want to move on to our other one, Whiskey?
Shall do, and dice be Dyson. Thank you, Fraggle Ken. Fraggle Ken? Ken Fraggle. I am still kicking in the tires on this whole gimmick thing. Anyways, on to our 3-time champion of the world, Kalorn. And join the
They're
church.
so going to murder me.
They murder you. They're going to come for me. I'm going to look outside. This is going to be torches and pitchforks. That actually can come off very wrong. Anyways, join the Church of the Decimators. They're exceptionally good, and they have chips on Tuesdays. What's your take on it? Hit me with it.
Oh man, I saw this one in the Hot Take channel on Discord, and I knew I had to grab it because, oh my god, the acolytes of the cult of Decimators, and I'm going to call it a cult here. They are absolutely adamant that Decimators are the best thing since sliced bread. And I have never in my life seen a Decimator other than Morna do anything but die. And so it's like, if you want to bring Decimators at me, I'm more than happy to blow them up. I'm perfectly happy to watch them explode. But man, I other than Morna, I just don't see it, man. They are too expensive, and they are not survivable enough. And I mean, don't do it, man. Just stay. Yeah, cults are bad. Let's just leave it at that.
Fraggle Ken, are you a believer in the church or are those religious zealots?
Decimators are awesome. I love Decimators. They throw out black dice and blue dice and 3 of them, and you get like 6 of them, and they all have rogue and they kill things. It's great. That just might be the way I roll dice, though. So I mean, I think the concept of Decimators are neat. You get 8 hull, you get a lot of dice to throw. They're fun. Are there better squadrons? Absolutely, there are better squadron mixes, of course. But you know what? Decimators. I'm not going to knock folks that love Decimators, because I mean that's like someone knocking me saying Grand Admiral Tarkin's never going to win a game. Not Grand Admiral, Grand Moff.
I'm not really trying to knock the people that like Decimators. I think Decimators are really cool. Right now, like there's a really interesting thing in Armada that's happening right now, and you have squadrons that beefy squadrons tend to be really good, particularly in like the Gar faction, and when you have like in the Rebel faction. The problem is like there's a point at which too much beef is too much, and it's kind of like a points invested versus hull kind of comparison. And I find that like the sweet spot for that is right at around YT 2400s, which are 17 points for 6 hull. And I find that Decimators, like it's what, 8 hull on them, Ken? I think it's 8.
Yeah, it's 8, and they're 22 points, I believe.
Yeah. And that just like goes off the other end. So I've played a lot with the VCXs, which are 8 hull and 15 points. And even that is problematic because of the way that, if you get a couple of good rolls from a really high powered squad, it's just gone. And so, 22 points from a Decimator to be killed in 2 attacks, that's a really good thing. If you say that you have 2 flight controllers, TIE fighters, and they roll 4 damage each, you used 16 points to kill 22, and there wasn't anything they could do about it. And I guess so, like that's where I find like the Decimator is a problem. It's not that I don't think that Decimators are cool, and I think that Decimators can do a lot of damage. The problem is that I feel like they just die too easily for what they are. If they were a little like, if they had like an inherent brace or something to make it so that they were, or they had 10 or 12 health, then we might be having a different conversation. But I feel like that 8 health and 22 point cost, it's like that's an ace that has defense tokens.
Well, We have two very different polar opposite opinions over here. By the way, if you do send out the Inquisition, send it to Kalorn's house. I had nothing to do with this one, okay? All right. So that was our show. Thank you, like always, for coming out and giving us a listen. Fragglekin, please let them know where they can find you, how they can reach you, or if you even want them to reach you, because some people be weird, they be touching stuff.
No, we definitely would love people to come out and check us out. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast. I had a lot of fun with you guys, and I know John's going to have a lot of fun with you in your next episode. But you guys can find us out on YouTube. We're at Ion Radio. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the socials and fun things. We've got links to all of those in our videos. You could check us out on our podcast Command Stack, where you get my opinion, John's, Ryan and Garrett's as well. So a lot of good content that we like to provide on the Ion Radio Show. Our big thing there is just get people involved in Armada, kind of give them something that's entertaining, and really we want to grow that community. So that's a lot of what we do on our socials and on our channel. So I welcome everyone to come out.
All right, awesome. I'm gonna definitely make sure you send me those links so I can put them in the gobbledygook down below, and this, and over on Facebook, and on the podcast channel. And where else do we have? We have stuff everywhere. It's like a freaking kids' room of just random things. Anyways, and because it's not in the script, I get to do it this week. You messed up, Kalord. You messed up. So I like to finish things with, let's give the world a little bit of positivity, Mr. Rogers style. Give something back into the universe. That's good. And because Kalorn messed up, he gets to go first. Kalorn, what you got for him?
Oh, but it rained in Texas for the first time in 2 months today, and oh man, I was so excited until the thunderstorm knocked out my power for 2 hours. That was not as awesome, but it rained in Texas, and so we're gonna be happy about that.
Enjoy the rain, folks. Ken, what do you got for the universe?
I'm just going to give a huge shout out to everyone that I got an opportunity to meet at Gencon. Everyone was so incredibly nice. It was fun to just talk to individuals and just learn more about their stories and understand what brought them to this great game of Armada and just to Indianapolis in general. So a lot of fun there, and that good, happy, positive feelings.
Good vibes and good happiness. And what I got for the universe is make sure you drink water, lift weights, read something every once in a while, and remember, always fly safe. Yeah, I totally butchered that. I butchered it at the end. I missed the landing. Always fly safe. Thank you for listening, and we'll see y'all next time.